Hi, I'm Peter Tragos, host of the Lawyer You Know podcast and YouTube channel. The saying goes, everyone hates lawyers until you need one. Well, I'm here when you need one to answer your questions and give you insight that you didn't know you needed. Along with my partners, Pete Sardis, the professor, who has a finance and business background, and George Tragos, my dad, and the consigliere, a criminal defense giant, we can answer any questions you have. Welcome in, everyone. It's the Lawyer You Know, and today we have a special episode breaking down what it actually means that the FBI is assisting the Australian government in potential perjury charges against Amber Heard. And to start this video and give you a little bit of background as to what those charges are, what the factual scenario is for those potential perjury charges, we're going to play a clip here from the Australian government discussing what facts are leading them to investigate Amber Heard for a potential charge of perjury, which carries with it up to 10 years in prison in Australia.
Heard, I can confirm the department is investigating that matter. So there was evidence presented in the London court case which suggested false statements were provided in the court case in Australia in 2016. So we are investigating that.
So what's the timeline you expect that investigation and decision made about?
As I understand it, the former state manager of Johnny Depp, Kevin Murphy, said in a witness statement that he told Heard, quote, by email, telephone and in person, that she could not take the dogs to Australia because the relevant paperwork and permits were not complete and the required 10-day quarantine arrangements had not been put in place. Murphy continued, Miss Heard later told the court in Australia that I had told her it was fine to bring the dogs into Australia. That is false. I never told her this.
Yes, so Senator, we understand that to be the case, or the evidence provided in the London court case, and giving a false testimony is an offence under the Crimes Act, so that is what we are now investigating.
So that's the scenario factually in Australia, but we know that Amber Heard has been accused of perjury all around the world. Australia, the UK, and of course in Virginia here in the United States. Everybody thinks she's lying under oath. All these different countries have different perjury charges, and we'll get to what that may mean as far as a domino effect if it starts in Australia. But to start out about the FBI involvement, a lot of people don't understand how the FBI works. They don't know why the FBI would be involved in this case. They think that means maybe it's a slam dunk. They think it maybe means something with extradition. We'll talk about all that today. We're going to break down what the FBI does, why the FBI would be involved in this investigation, whether or not they can extradite her to Australia if she's charged, whether or not they will. We will get to all that, but I wanted to bring my dad on the show, who was a former federal prosecutor in the Middle District here in Tampa. And federal prosecutors work very closely with the FBI. And now as a federal criminal defense lawyer, we work a lot against the FBI. So we see how they're involved in investigations, and my dad knows specifically how they work in international and national cases. But first, as a building point, as a federal prosecutor, how do you use the FBI? How are they involved in just normal federal prosecutions here stateside?
Well, the FBI is the largest federal criminal investigation unit. I mean, we have others like Customs or the DEA, but the FBI is the largest, and they have the most resources. So when you have and they have the broadest jurisdiction as well. So when you have your average fraud, white collar, those kinds of cases, bank robberies, you go to the FBI, they do the investigation.
So they're basically in place of local law enforcement. If you have a normal criminal case, local law enforcement, a beat cop, whoever it may be, a detective that's working on the case is your witness. They're the person that's the lead investigator. Well, in a federal case with federal crimes, the FBI is the lead investigator. The FBI agents are the witnesses and the people actually handling the investigation. And as he said, they have a broad jurisdiction. They're always lead on the case, as we saw with Gabby Petito. The FBI worked with multiple different local law enforcement agencies, but they were the top dog there. Anytime the FBI shows up, they are usually first on the list as far as clearance and authority.
They want to be.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
FBI always wants to be the lead agency, yes.
And they can usually control that because in order to allow them to be the lead agency, you get all of their power and all of their resources and all of their pull.
And their laboratories and their, the science they have. Those kinds of things are hard to replace.
Right, and in federal cases, that's why it's so difficult on the federal criminal defense side, because they have all of the resources and power and money of the FBI and federal law enforcement. So when we talk about the FBI now a little more internationally, how would they ever come to be involved in this case? How does the FBI work internationally? Just kind of describe that for everyone.
Well, I think that's the part a lot of people don't realize. The FBI has an office in over probably 50 major cities around the world, maybe more. Definitely in every friendly capital. So in the capital of Australia, there are agents actually assigned, they actually live there, and they have an office there.
They actually have an office, an FBI field office in Australia.
Absolutely. And they may have more than one. But they're there because crime is just not local, crime is international. And they need the help of Australian forces in investigation, just like the Australians need the help of the United States in investigations. And this is a prime example of why they need that kind of help.
So when an FBI is assisting or becoming involved in something like a perjury investigation for Amber Heard, what does that mean and what does that look like?
Well, there are different levels. There's the simple request, can you tell me where so-and-so lives in Idaho? And, they do an investigation and find that out. Or we need to go to court and get some subpoenas or search warrants for a house. That involves what's called an MLAT, Mutual Law Enforcement Assistance Treaty. And an MLAT is a separate treaty from an extradition treaty. So they use an MLAT. That MLAT gives them the right to come into U.S. courts or for U.S. to go in Australian courts. It works both ways on those treaties.
So when they become involved in a case like this or are assisting, it could be as simple as a lot of the witnesses live here, the potential defendant lives here, they may need some simple information.
Right, they go to the agent in Australia that they know because they have a relationship with the Australian FBI agent. So he's there. He then calls the office in Boise, Idaho, as an example. An agent in Boise then will go out and do what he's asking him to do, report back, and then he will tell the Australian counterpart.
So it can be a spectrum of anywhere from very simple to very involved when it comes to assisting.
Yes.
So when the FBI is said to or reportedly assisting on a case, does that automatically mean anything? Does it mean it's more serious? Does it mean charges are more likely? What does it actually mean? What do you take from that the FBI is assisting on this case?
It doesn't mean that charges are more likely. What it means is they need some help to find some information in their investigation. That's all it means, because there's no threshold. They don't have to prove to the FBI they have probable cause. They don't have to prove to the FBI that they have real evidence of something. All they have to do is say, hey, can you help us? Again, someday you might want help from us, so let's work it out together, and that's what they do.
So more likely this is not really an indication of anything bigger.
Correct.
And the FBI would not be the ones investigating and assisting in a prosecution of Amber Heard for breaking the laws in Australia.
No, not unless they were requested to do so.
Right, and it doesn't seem like that at this point, and it really would be unlikely. If you listen to the evidence that they've presented in Australia, it seems like an open and shut case. It seems like they have a lot of evidence of this perjury. We heard some of it already read on this video earlier, so it seems like they're going to have enough evidence to handle that stuff themselves. But it's more likely they're looking to locate witnesses or certain things about Amber Heard here, and that's why they may involve the FBI, if at all.
Maybe they're looking for the dogs.
Yeah, whatever it may be. The FBI's assistance in the case to us doesn't really necessarily indicate anything more serious or additional that may be coming. But let's talk a little bit about extradition. If Amber Heard was prosecuted and convicted of perjury in Australia, first the question is, can she be extradited to Australia to serve that penalty?
Well, first off, before they try her in Australia, they're going to arrest her in the United States, take her back for trial. So the first thing is there has to be an arrest warrant issued in Australia, then an extradition warrant, then that's sent to the Secretary of State, and yes, a U.S. citizen can be extradited to Australia.
Okay, so they can be, but what is the likelihood of that happening? What are some of the things they take into the consideration, into balancing as to whether or not they actually want to do that to a citizen of their country, to send them to another country to be prosecuted for a crime?
There is almost no balancing in this country, the country that has actually been asked. The requesting country may make some decision about whether or not they want to go through the expense of extraditing, because it's expensive, extraditing somebody there for a perjury, like this type of perjury. But as far as this country goes, unless it's political,
this country being America?
United States, right? Okay. Unless it's a political prosecution or there's a human rights violation, something like that might affect an extradition. Otherwise, if there's probable cause, if the Australian government can prove that to a court in the United States, the person gets extradited.
And it really a lot of times comes down to if what they're being prosecuted for in that country is also illegal here, because like what you're saying, like a human rights issue, right? if somebody is being prosecuted for something in another country that is not illegal here, that's a freedom we have here, they end up in that country, something happens and they get prosecuted, then maybe that could come into play as far as an extradition.
Well, that's called dual criminality.
Right. But when you're talking about something that is very similar to the laws we have here as far as perjury, they feel like they can present the United States with enough evidence or whatever it is for probable cause, then it's more likely she actually could get extradited to Australia to be tried for this.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's something that could actually happen. So if that were to happen, what effect, if any, could that have on potential perjury charges or investigations in the United Kingdom or the United States?
Well, I would think, technically, it has no effect.
Right. Just because you're prosecuted and convicted in another country means nothing as far as a domino effect that, oh, let's use that evidence to convict her here. That's not really how it works. But prosecutors are human. And when they see that this same defendant that may be accused of perjury here or in the UK, they feel like they may have some evidence, they see her get convicted somewhere else, I do think it plays into their mind as to whether or not they want to prosecute these kinds of crimes. Because we talked about it a lot, how perjury gets swept under the rug or just looked to the side of, or people just don't think it's worth prosecuting. But when you have this high profile of a defendant, if she gets convicted in other countries, I think it actually is more likely that prosecutors may actually look into perjury charges in the country or state that they are in.
I think that there's also an economic, believe it or not, an economic view. Is it worth the money to prosecute her? Let's say she gets convicted in Australia and she goes to prison for a couple years. Well, is it really worth it to prosecute her for perjury here, to send her to pile on like that? Because it's expensive. Do we really want to use the court's time to do that when she's already got a sentence in Australia and going to prison in Australia? Of course, we've already got her convicted, which isn't right. But
probably not is the point. Yeah, probably not. Right. So if she goes and gets convicted somewhere else, but we do see the state and federal dual system happening in our own country where people ask the same question. Ahmaud Arbery, we saw it. With Derek Chauvin, we saw it. And the George Floyd case. So we saw it in those cases where they didn't just prosecute them at the state level, but also the federal level. Seems like maybe a waste of money, but people wanted to do that. There was some public justice and stuff for that as well, as to where it may seem like not a great use of judicial economy. Sometimes it is worth it.
Well, the high
this doesn't really
profile.
this doesn't really rise to that level of, public interest.
Right.
Well, public policy, I should say, definitely public interest,
Right.
because the public is interested in this, but it doesn't have the same level of necessity as those other cases to really send a message, let's say. So even though people feel strongly about what Amber Heard has done, it's not really the same scenario as those.
Right, but you think about it. How many cases of perjury investigation in Australia make headlines in the United
Zero.
States?
Yeah, literally zero.
Think about it. And think about what the perjury is. I'm not discounting it. You should never lie. But think about what she lied about.
Right, the dog's
in
shots
Australia.
quarantine or something.
And yet, again, headlines in the United States.
Yeah.
So you can't say that the public perception isn't going to have an impact, because it certainly is.
So if she does get convicted in Australia, if there were further charges in the United States, how would that affect her sentencing guidelines and how they would potentially sentence her here?
It would affect her several ways. One, if she testified at her trial here, they could use the fact that she had a prior conviction against her. So the jury would know that she had a prior conviction.
If there was a future trial, but this trial is already, so you're saying if there was a perjury trial here.
Right.
Right. So they could bring up the fact that there is a prior perjury conviction.
Well, prior conviction.
And then also if there's any more civil trials, like if the Johnny Depp appeal, this is all just total speculation and guessing and what ifs, but if she won her appeal and then they tried the defamation case again, they would be able to bring out the fact that she has a perjury conviction lying under oath in Australia. That would come out in that trial as well.
Right. She would basically, she'd have to own the fact that she had a prior felony conviction. So that would hurt her credibility in any second trial or any subsequent trial for any other crime she's involved in. It'd be with her for the rest of her life.
Right. And then what about the sentencing? How would it affect sentencing?
In sentencing guidelines, they factor in prior convictions. So this would be a conviction. It would raise her guidelines. She'd get a harsher sentence because of her prior conviction.
So even though it is in another country, if she is convicted of this, it would be something that followed her even through our court system on the civil and the criminal side. So it wouldn't be something that is just isolated to Australia, even though it wouldn't automatically bring other charges here and things like that. It would affect how things go for Amber Heard in the future.
Yes, it'll stay with her forever.
So just because the FBI is involved does not necessarily mean one thing, one way or the other, but these perjury charges could have some long-lasting effects on Amber Heard. So we're going to keep an eye on this stuff, and if something pops up that you guys want us to react to, make sure you send it to us on Twitter or Instagram at Tragos Law, like you've already been doing. Make sure you subscribe to this page and like the video if you're here for the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp content. But for now, that's all we've got. Thanks for watching this episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you like this content, please share it with your friends. Make sure you subscribe to our page and like our videos. If you want some interaction, get in the comments and we'll be sure to get back to you. If you want to know any more information about our firm or this page, you can find out in the description or visit tragoslaw.com. We post multiple times throughout the week, so make sure you hit that bell so you can get the notification and not miss out on the next episode.